In the heart of a forgotten city stands the Magnolia Hotel, once a symbol of luxury and glamour, now a decaying carcass of a long-buried past. When a group of urban explorers decides to investigate the dusty corridors and abandoned rooms, they inadvertently awaken a sinister force that has been waiting for decades for their return. What begins as an exciting adventure soon transforms into a living nightmare, where echoes of the past take shape and the dead refuse to remain silent. The full moon hung like a watchful eye over the imposing silhouette of the Magnolia Hotel, its once majestic contours now nothing more than jagged shadows against the night sky. The wind howled through broken windows, carrying with it the lament of long-buried secrets. 5 figures approached stealthily, their flashlights dancing like lost fireflies in the darkness. The group of urban explorers, led by the fearless and impulsive Sarah, could barely contain their excitement. This abandoned hotel, a sleeping giant in the heart of the city, promised to be their greatest conquest yet. "They say the Magnolia was the pinnacle of luxury in the 50s, murmured Mike, adjusting the camera around his neck. "Celebrities, politicians, even royalty. And now, just rats and dust," completed Emily, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the nervousness she was trying to hide. The group stopped in front of the main doors, once golden and imposing, now corroded by time and neglect. David, the oldest and most cautious of the group, hesitated. "Maybe we should reconsider. This place, there's something wrong." Sarah laughed, although the sound seemed strangely muffled in the heavy night air. "Don't tell me you believe those ghost stories, David. We've come this far. We're not turning back now." As they argued, Jason, the 5th member, a taciturn young man with a peculiar interest in the occult, touched the rusty doorknob. The moment his fingers made contact, a shiver ran through his body. For a moment, almost imperceptible, the lights in the lobby flickered, as if the hotel had awakened from a long sleep. "It's open," he murmured, pushing the door that opened with an agonizing groan. The group entered, and the air changed. The smell of mold and decay was momentarily replaced by a ghostly aroma of expensive perfume and fine cigars. For an instant, they could almost hear the clinking of crystal glasses and the murmur of elegant conversations. But as quickly as it came, the sensation was gone, leaving them in the dusty void of the lobby. The flashlights revealed torn carpets, broken chandeliers, and a majestic staircase leading to the darkness of the upper floors. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes shining with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. "Welcome to the Magnolia Hotel, folks. Let's find out what secrets it's hiding." Little did they know that by crossing that threshold, they had become unwitting actors in a macabre play. The hotel, far from being empty, was filled with eager presences that had waited decades for new guests. And now, finally, the party could begin anew. The group advanced cautiously through the lobby, their flashlights creating dancing shadows on the peeling walls. The marble floor, once imposing, was now cracked and stained, creaking under their hesitant steps. "Let's split up to cover more ground," suggested Sarah, her voice echoing unsettlingly in the empty space. David immediately protested. "Bad idea. Have you seen any horror movie? Splitting up never ends well." Ignoring the warning, Sarah assigned areas to each of them. "Mike, check out the old restaurant. Emily, the game room. Jason, take a look at the administrative offices. David, you come with me to the kitchen." Reluctantly, the group dispersed. Mike entered what remained of the restaurant, his flash illuminating dusty tables still set for a dinner that never happened. As he passed a particularly well-arranged table, he froze. For an instant, he could have sworn he saw a napkin move, as if someone invisible had just placed it on their lap. In the game room, Emily wandered among abandoned poker tables and rusty slot machines. A sudden movement made her spin abruptly. A billiard ball was rolling slowly across the table, as if it had just been played. Is someone there?" she stammered, her voice trembling. Jason, in the offices, was leafing through old records, fascinated by the dark history that was beginning to reveal itself. Names of famous guests, hushed-up incidents, mysterious deaths. His eyes widened as he found a page stained with red. "Blood," he murmured, touching the stain. At the same moment he felt as if icy fingers were caressing the back of his neck. In the kitchen, Sarah and David faced their own terror. Pots began to tinkle softly, as if a ghostly team of chefs had begun preparing a spectral banquet. "Must be the wind," Sarah tried to rationalize, but her voice betrayed her growing fear. David, pale, pointed to a large dark stain on the pantry floor. That looks like blood," he whispered. At that moment a sharp scream cut through the air, coming from the direction of the game room. "Emily!" they shouted in unison. Running to find the others, gathered again in the lobby. The five were visibly shaken. Emily was trembling, unable to articulate what she had seen. Mike showed on his camera photos of shadowy figures that weren't there when he took them. Jason held tightly to a record book, his eyes wild with newly acquired knowledge. "We need to leave," David pleaded. "This place, it's alive." But Sarah, despite the evident fear in her eyes, insisted, "We can't go now. Something's happening here, something big. We need to find out what it is." As they discussed their next step, none of them noticed the main doors closing silently, locking them inside the hotel. The Magnolia had waited patiently for decades. Now that it had new guests, it wasn't willing to let them leave so soon. Reluctantly, but driven by a morbid curiosity that overcame fear, the group decided to explore the upper floor. The staircase creaked under their feet, each step an ignored warning. At the top, a long corridor stretched out, punctuated by closed doors and foggy mirrors. At the end, a pair of carved double doors promised something grandiose. "Must be the ballroom," Sarah murmured, her voice mixing fascination and apprehension. Jason, frantically leafing through the record book, added, "It says here that the last event held was a masquerade ball in 1962. After that, nothing." Approaching the doors, a faint sound made them all freeze. A distant melody, almost imperceptible, seemed to come from inside the ballroom. You hear that?" asked Emily, her voice barely above a whisper. David, the skeptic of the group, tried to rationalize, "Must be the wind passing through some crack." But when Sarah pushed the doors, David's explanation evaporated like mist in the sun. The ballroom revealed itself in all its decadent glory. Chandeliers covered in cobwebs still hung from the ornate ceiling, and stained mirrors reflected the light from the flashlights, creating illusions of movement in the dark corners. And then, for a fleeting moment, they all saw ethereal figures gliding across the ballroom, dresses twirling, tuxedos gleaming. The music, before a whisper, grew into a ghostly crescendo of violins and pianos. Mike, in panic, raised his camera, firing the flash repeatedly. Each flash froze the scene, pale faces with empty smiles, lifeless eyes fixed in an eternal dance. "My God," gasped Sarah, her earlier bravado disappearing. "They're dancing." Jason, fascinated, took a step forward, almost hypnotized by the vision. A female figure, wearing a blood-red dress and an ornate mask, seemed to notice his presence. She turned, extending a pale hand towards him. "Jason, no!" shouted Emily, pulling him back. The moment she touched him, the entire scene dissipated like smoke. The music ceased abruptly, leaving only the echo of its memory in the ears of the terrified group. David, visibly trembling, murmured, We need to get out of here. Now. But when they turned to the exit, they found the doors closed. On the other side, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps slowly approaching down the corridor. Sarah, her voice trembling but determined, said, I think the hotel doesn't want us to leave yet." The group huddled in the center of the ballroom, flashlights pointed at the doors. The sound of footsteps stopped right in front of them. For a moment there was only silence. Then slowly, the doorknobs began to turn. The ballroom doors opened with a chilling creak, revealing nothing. The corridor was empty, but an icy breeze invaded the ballroom, as if something invisible had passed by them. "We have to get out of here," whispered Emily, her voice trembling. The group hurriedly left the ballroom, hearts pounding. As they walked down the corridor, the numbers on the doors seemed to dance under the light of the flashlights. 235, 236. "Wait," said Jason, stopping abruptly. "Room 237. There's something about it in the record book." Before anyone could protest, he approached the door. The wood was marked by deep scratches, as if someone, or something, had desperately tried to get out, or in. "Don't open that door!" exclaimed David, but it was too late. The doorknob turned under Jason's fingers, and the door opened with a prolonged groan. The smell that emanated from the room was a nauseating mixture of sweet perfume and something putrid. Sarah, overcoming her fear with curiosity, was the first to enter, followed reluctantly by the others. Room 237 seemed frozen in time. A canopy bed dominated the space, its sheets still rumpled, as if someone had just gotten up. On the mirror of the dressing table a message was written in red lipstick. "He killed me here." Mike, trembling, raised his camera to photograph the message, but the flash revealed something that made them all scream. For an instant, the reflection in the mirror showed not the group of explorers, but a pale woman, with eyes wide with terror and strangulation marks on her neck. Jason, frantically leafing through the record book, read aloud. October 17th, 1962. Movie star found dead in room 237. Official cause, accidental overdose. At that moment, the temperature in the room plummeted. The mirror began to crack, lines spreading like spider webs from the written message. A female voice, an agonizing whisper, echoed through the room. "He's coming. He always comes back." Objects began to fly around the room. A lamp shattered against the wall, nearly hitting Emily. Drawers opened and closed violently. "Get out!" shouted Sarah, pushing everyone out of the room. As soon as the last of them crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut, with supernatural force, nearly severing David's fingers. Panting and trembling, they leaned against the opposite wall of the corridor. The silence that followed was broken only by their heavy breathing and the distant sound of a male laugh, cruel and cold, coming from somewhere in the depths of the hotel. What just happened?" asked Mike, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, trying to maintain her composure, replied, "I think we just witnessed an echo of the past, a horrible crime that the hotel hasn't forgotten." Jason, still clutching the record book, murmured, "And I think we've awakened something more than memories, something that doesn't want the truth to come to light." At that moment, the corridor lights flickered, turning on and off in a frantic sequence. When darkness settled again, they realized with horror that they were separated, each alone in a different corridor. The male voice, now closer and more threatening, echoed, "Welcome to the Magnolia Hotel. Your stay will be eternal." Panic set in as each member of the group found themselves alone in a corridor that seemed to stretch infinitely. The walls pulsed as if they were alive, and the wallpaper twisted in impossible patterns. Sarah, always the leader, tried to stay calm. "Guys, can you hear me?" Her voice echoed, distorted, coming back to her like a mocking laugh. Determined, she began to move forward, her flashlight revealing doors that seemed to multiply in front of her. Mike, trembling, raised his camera like a shield. Through the lens, he saw shadowy figures moving at the edges of his vision, always disappearing when he tried to focus on them. A click sounded, and the camera screen showed a photo he didn't remember taking, his own face disfigured and screaming. Emily found herself in a corridor that looked like a tube of distorted mirrors. Each reflection showed a different version of her, older, younger, injured, dead. She closed her eyes, murmuring to herself, "It's not real, it's not real." When she opened them, she saw her reflection, smiling maliciously back, even though she wasn't smiling. David, the skeptic, tried to rationalize what was happening. "It's just a collective hallucination," he repeated, until the floor beneath his feet began to liquefy, pulling him down. He struggled, screaming for help, his hands desperately grasping at the floorboards that seemed to transform into fingers, pulling him even deeper. Jason, still clutching the record book, saw the pages come to life. Words flowed like fresh ink, forming new stories, revealing dark secrets of the hotel. Names of long-dead guests, details of obscure rituals performed in the basements, pacts made with forces beyond human comprehension. Each revelation made the corridor around him contort, as if the hotel itself was reacting to the exposure of its secrets. Suddenly, a sharp scream cut through the air. It was Emily's voice. "Help! Something's pulling me!" Sarah, hearing the scream, began to run in its direction, but the corridor seemed to stretch infinitely. "Emily, where are you?" Mike, coming out of his terror-induced trance, also heard the scream. He saw a door open in front of him, revealing a glimpse of Emily, being dragged by shadows into a room. "No!" he shouted, running towards her, but the door slammed shut violently before he could reach it. David, finally managing to free himself from the engulfing floor, staggered to a wall, panting. He saw a figure in the distance, recognizing it as Jason. "Jason, here." But when Jason turned, his eyes were completely black, and an inhuman smile spread across his face. "David," he said, his voice a mixture of Jason's and something much older and more evil. "The hotel has plans for you." Meanwhile, Sarah finally reached a door that seemed to promise escape. She opened it, only to find herself back in the hotel lobby. But it wasn't empty. Dozens of spectral figures turned to face her, their faces a mixture of pain, anger, and supernatural hunger. A voice, the same one they had heard before, echoed through the lobby. "Welcome back, Sarah. The party is just beginning." The group, now separated and facing their worst nightmares, realized that the Magnolia Hotel was not just a place. It was a living entity, hungry, and they were its newest feast. Sarah, surrounded by spectres in the lobby, felt an invisible force pull her to the ground. The marble floor opened like a hungry mouth, swallowing her towards the depths of the hotel. She screamed, but the sound was muffled by the maniacal laughter of the entities around her. Meters below, Sarah landed painfully in a damp and foul-smelling basement. As she regained her senses, she realized she wasn't alone. Mike, Emily, David, and Jason were there, their eyes wide with terror. "What is this place?" whispered Emily, her voice trembling. Jason, still clutching the blood-stained record book, responded hoarsely, "The foundations of the hotel, where everything began." The basement walls were covered with strange symbols, primitive drawings, and inscriptions in an unknown language. In the center of the space, a circle of black stones surrounded an obsidian altar. David, the skeptic, was now visibly shaking. This can't be real. Mike, fiddling frantically with his camera, exclaimed, "Look at this." He showed the others a series of photos he had unconsciously taken during their escape through the corridors. The images revealed horrifying scenes, bloody rituals, human sacrifices, and a monstrous entity that seemed to be emerging from the hotel itself. Sarah, gathering courage, approached the altar. "There's something engraved here." Jason, leafing through the book, read aloud, 1922. Construction of the Magnolia Hotel over ruins of an ancient temple. Architect mysteriously disappeared after completion. Suddenly, the shadows on the walls came to life, forming grotesque silhouettes that danced around them. A voice, the same that had been pursuing them, echoed through the basement. "Welcome to the heart of the Magnolia. You're not the first to discover our secrets, but you'll be the last." The shadows condensed, forming the figure of a tall man, dressed in a 1920s suit. His face was a mask of pure evil. "I am Ezekiel Magnolia, the builder of this hotel," the figure announced. "A century ago, I made a pact with forces beyond human comprehension. In exchange for wealth and power, I promised to feed them with the souls of the guests." Horrific images flooded the group's minds. Decades of deaths disguised as accidents, staged suicides, covered-up murders. The hotel was a killing machine, disguised as luxury and glamour. "But their appetite is insatiable," continued Ezekiel, his smile revealing teeth as sharp as razors. "And now we need new blood to maintain the pact." Sarah, gathering all her courage, stepped forward. "Why us? Why now?" Ezekiel laughed, a sound that made the walls tremble. "You volunteered by entering here. And as for why now, well, their hunger grows each day. The hotel needs to fully awaken, to expand beyond these walls. And you, my dears, are the keys to that." The group realized with horror that their steps, their explorations, had inadvertently activated some kind of ritual. They were both victims and catalysts for something much larger and more terrible than they could imagine. Jason, his eyes fixed on the book, murmured, "There's a way to stop it, a counter-ritual, but it requires a voluntary sacrifice." The shadows around them stirred violently, and Ezekiel's voice thundered, "Enough revelations. The time of awakening has come." The ground began to shake, and distant screams echoed from above, as if the hotel was coming to life and expanding throughout the city. The group found themselves faced with an impossible choice: try to escape and condemn countless others, or make the ultimate sacrifice to stop the evil they had unwittingly awakened. Sarah, her voice firm, despite the fear, spoke, "We have to stop it, no matter the cost." The darkness around them seemed to smile, anticipating the climax of this macabre game that had lasted a century. The basement shook violently, pieces of the ceiling beginning to collapse around them. Ezekiel Magnolia's laughter echoed from all sides, mixing with the distant screams coming from the city above. "We have to get out of here," shouted David, finally breaking his state of shock. Sarah, with fierce determination in her eyes, shouted over the chaos, "Jason, what does the book say about the counter-ritual?" Jason, frantically flipping through the blood-stained pages, replied, "We need to get to the roof, the highest point of the hotel." The group ran towards the stairs leading out of the basement, shadows grabbing at their ankles, trying to pull them back. Mike stumbled, almost falling, but Emily grabbed him at the last second. As they climbed the stairs, the hotel seemed to fight against them. Steps disappeared under their feet. Handrails transformed into snakes, trying to bite them. At each floor they passed, they saw scenes of horror through open doors. Rooms full of bones, corridors flooded with blood, windows showing impossible landscapes of other worlds. "Don't look," shouted Sarah. "It's all illusion. Keep climbing." At what seemed to be the 10th floor, they found their path blocked. The corridor ahead had disappeared, replaced by an abyss that seemed bottomless. "Now what?" asked Emily, desperation evident in her voice. Mike, surprising everyone, stepped forward. I think I can see the path." His eyes were unfocused, as if he was seeing something the others couldn't. "Follow me." Trusting him, the group moved forward. To the others it seemed they were walking on air, but under their feet, invisible steps led them onward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a rusty metal door. On the other side they could hear the howling of the wind. "The roof!" exclaimed Jason. But when they tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. Ezekiel's voice echoed. Again, "Did you really think it would be that easy?" Shadows began to solidify around them, taking the form of long-dead guests, their faces contorted in expressions of agony. David, in a burst of courage, shouted, "You don't belong to this place anymore. You're being used." For a moment, the shadows hesitated. Sarah, sensing the opening, continued, "You can help us end this, to free everyone." Slowly the shadows began to recede. One of them, the figure of a woman in a 1950s dress, stepped forward and touched the door. With a snap, it opened. The group rushed onto the roof, the wind whipping their faces. The city below was plunged into chaos, giant shadows spreading through the streets, swallowing entire buildings. Jason, shouting to be heard above the wind, said, "The ritual, we need to form a circle." They positioned themselves, hands joined. Jason began to recite words from the book, his voice gaining a supernatural resonance. But then, Ezekiel Magnolia materialized in the center of the circle, his form now monstrous and distorted. "Fools, the sacrifice must be made. One of you must die for the ritual to be complete." The group looked at each other, the weight of the decision hanging over them. Who would make the ultimate sacrifice? Sarah stepped forward, but before she could speak, a voice surprised them. "I'll do it." It was Mike. Before anyone could react, Mike ran towards Ezekiel, embracing the monstrous figure. "Now, Jason, finish the ritual." Jason, with tears in his eyes, shouted the final words of the enchantment. A blinding light enveloped Mike and Ezekiel, and a deafening scream echoed through the city. When the light dissipated, the hotel began to crumble beneath their feet. "We have to get out of here," shouted Sarah. The group ran desperately, descending stairs that disappeared behind them, jumping over abysses that opened in the floor. With each step, the hotel collapsed more. Finally, with a last desperate leap, they emerged through the main door, rolling onto the sidewalk as the Magnolia Hotel imploded behind them in a cloud of dust and debris. Panting, bruised, but alive, they watched the last vestiges of the hotel disappear. The nightmare was over, but at a terrible cost. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, a surreal contrast to the devastation that surrounded them. Sarah, Emily, David and Jason remained seated on the sidewalk, covered in dust and scratches, staring fixedly at the spot where the imposing Magnolia Hotel once stood. Now only a pile of rubble remained, with a thin supernatural mist slowly dissipating. Sirens wailed in the distance, approaching. The city was beginning to wake up, oblivious to the supernatural horror that had almost consumed it during the night. "Is it over?" asked Emily, her voice hoarse and trembling. Jason, still clutching the now nearly shredded record book, nodded slowly. "I think so. The pact was broken. Mike's sacrifice." His voice faltered, and a heavy silence fell over the group. The reality of the loss of their friend was beginning to sink in, mixing with the relief of having survived. David, the skeptic of the group, seemed to have aged years in a single night. How are we going to explain this? Who's going to believe us? Sarah stood up, her eyes reflecting a mixture of determination and sadness. We can't tell the whole truth. No one would believe it. But, she hesitated, looking at the others. We have a responsibility now. What we saw, what we learned, it can't be forgotten. Jason raised the book. There's more in here. Other places like the Magnolia. Other pacts, other entities. A shiver ran through the group. The idea that what they had faced was not an isolated case, but part of something larger and darker, was terrifying. Emily, with tears in her eyes, spoke. Mike. He sacrificed himself to save us, to save everyone. We can't let it be in vain. At that moment, the first police officers and firefighters arrived on the scene. The group exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. Sarah took the lead, preparing to tell an edited version of the night's events. A story of urban exploration gone wrong, of an old building that collapsed inexplicably. A partial truth that would protect the world from the complete and terrible truth. As the authorities surrounded them, asking questions and offering blankets, each of the survivors was lost in their own thoughts. David, whose skepticism had been shattered, now saw the world with new eyes, aware of the shadows that hid in the corners. Emily felt the weight of survivors' guilt, silently vowing to honor Mike's memory in everything she would do from now on. Jason, with the book hidden in his jacket, knew he had a life of research and vigilance ahead of him, seeking other places marked by the supernatural. And Sarah, the reluctant leader, realized that their adventure had not ended, but only just begun. The knowledge they had acquired was a burden, but also a responsibility. As the sun rose in the sky, dissipating the last shadows of the night, the 4 survivors of the Magnolia Hotel knew that their lives would never be the same again. Marked by the experience, united by trauma and loss, they were now part of a hidden world, guardians of a terrible secret. And somewhere in the ruins of the hotel, under tons of concrete and memories, a faint echo could be heard, the whisper of a laugh, the distant clinking of crystal glasses. For although the Magnolia Hotel had fallen, its secrets and horrors remained, patiently waiting for the moment to resurface and claim new guests for its eternal and macabre ball. The cafe was almost empty at that hour of the night. Sarah occupied her usual table in the corner, a cup of black coffee cooling beside her as she furiously typed on her laptop. The deep circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights and persistent nightmares. The door chime tinkled, and she looked up to see Jason enter, carrying a worn folder. He joined her, depositing the folder on the table with a dull thud. "I found another one," he said, his voice low and tired. "A hotel on the west coast. The patterns are identical." Sarah nodded gravely, opening the folder to examine the contents. Photos, newspaper clippings, witness accounts. All the pieces of a macabre puzzle they had been putting together for years. "Emily called," Sarah said after a moment. "She had another episode. Said she saw Mike." Jason closed his eyes, the pain evident on his face. "And David?" "Still institutionalized. The doctors say he's improving, but..." Sarah let the sentence hang, both knowing that improvement was a relative concept after what they had experienced. The silence that followed was interrupted by the soft sound of a notification on Sarah's laptop. She frowned as she read the newly arrived email. "It's from Detective Rodriguez," she murmured. "More disappearances, this time at a mountain resort." Jason sighed heavily. "When do we leave?" "First thing in the morning," Sarah replied, already closing the laptop and gathering her belongings. We need to get there before it's too late. As they rose to leave, Sarah hesitated, her hand instinctively touching the small medallion she wore around her neck, a posthumous gift from Mike, found in the rubble of the Magnolia. "Sometimes I wonder," she said softly, "if we really escaped that night, or if we're still trapped there in some eternal nightmare." Jason placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We escaped, Sarah, but we brought something with us, and as long as there are places like the Magnolia, our work won't be finished." They walked out into the cold night, two lonely figures against the darkness. Behind them, in the reflection of the cafe window, a shadow seemed to move on its own, a distant echo of a familiar laugh echoing in the night air. The Magnolia Hotel had fallen, but its curse lived on through those who survived, and somewhere, waiting in the shadows, new horrors awaited discovery. The fall of the Magnolia Hotel is just one chapter in the vast anthology of terror. In every city, in every abandoned structure, there are dark secrets waiting to be unveiled. The echoes of the past resonate through time, calling those brave or foolish enough to listen. Sarah, Jason, Emily, and David discovered that surviving the horror is only the beginning. Their fates are now intertwined with the shadows that lurk in the forgotten corners of our world. Stay tuned for the next tale by Draven Nocturnus, where new curses, hungry entities, and supernatural pacts await those who dare to explore the unknown. For as long as there is darkness, there will be stories to be told until the next night of terror. Remember, not all hotels are eager for you to check out. Some wish for you to stay forever.